You open your banking app. You don't actually know what the number says before you look. Not because you're avoiding it, because it doesn't scare you anymore. Most people can tell you their balance to the dollar because that number controls them. If it doesn't control you, something has already changed. That change rarely shows up as a bigger paycheck. It shows up as three quiet habits, and almost nobody notices they have them until someone points them out. Here's the uncomfortable part. Being financially ahead isn't about your income. It isn't even about your net worth, not directly. Two people can earn the exact same salary and be on completely different trajectories because one of them has restructured how money moves through their life and the other hasn't. The gap between them won't show up this year. It will show up in 15. You won't find these signs on a net worth calculator. You won't find them in a salary comparison either. They're behavioral, almost invisible from the outside, and that's exactly why so many people miss them in themselves. You could be sitting on real progress right now and not even recognize it, simply because progress like this doesn't come with a notification. So let's talk about the three signs. Not signs of being rich, signs of being ahead. The first sign is this. Your money already has a job before you ever see it. You don't decide to save what's left over at the end of the month. There is nothing left over, on purpose, because a chunk of every paycheck was already gone before you logged in. This sounds small. It isn't. In 2004, behavioral economists Richard Thaler and Shlomo Benartzi ran a program called Save More Tomorrow. The idea was simple. Instead of asking employees to cut their spending today, which almost nobody does, they asked employees to commit future raises to their retirement savings automatically. No willpower required, no monthly decision. Just a structure that moved money before the persons could touch it. Savings rates for participants nearly quadrupled over time, from under 4% to close to 14%, without a single person feeling like they were sacrificing anything in the moment. That's the mechanism behind sign one. People who are ahead have quietly turned saving into something that happens to them, not something they have to choose every single week. Willpower is unreliable. Structure isn't. If you're investing, you're saving, your debt payoff, all require you to make an active decision every month. You're fighting a battle most people lose. If it already happened automatically before your coffee got cold, you've removed the battle entirely. Think about what this actually replaces. Without automation, saving competes against every single purchase decision you make that month. The takeout order, the sale notification, the impulse click at 11 at night. Your future self is negotiating against your present self dozens of times a week. And your present self is standing right there, while your future self isn't even in the room. Automate it, and the negotiation is over before it starts. The money simply isn't available to spend, so there's nothing left to talk yourself into. Now here's the second sign, and it's less about mechanics and more about time. People who are ahead think in decades. Everyone else thinks in paydays. Ask someone stressed about money what they're thinking about, and it's usually this week, this bill, this Friday. Ask someone financially ahead the same question, and they're often thinking about something 10 or 20 years out that has almost nothing to do with this week's grocery bill. This isn't a personality quirk. It's been studied directly. In the late 1960s, psychologist Walter Mischel ran what became known as the marshmallow experiment at Stanford. Children were offered one marshmallow now, or two marshmallows. If they could wait 15 minutes alone in a room, with the first one sitting in front of them. Decades of follow-up research linked the children who waited to better outcomes later in life, including financial ones. Not because delaying gratification is a magic trait, but because it reflects an ability to hold a future reward as more real than a present one. Money works the same way. A dollar invested today is only meaningful to you if the version of you in 20 years feels real, not hypothetical. This shows up concretely in research on actual millionaires. Thomas Stanley and William Danko, in their book The Millionaire Next Door, studied the real financial habits of American millionaires and found something that surprised almost everyone. Most of them didn't look rich. They drove used cars. They lived in modest houses, often below what their income could technically afford. They weren't optimizing for how the next 12 months looked. They were optimizing for how the next 20 years compounded. The visible lifestyle upgrade that impresses people at a dinner party was, for most of these households, a trade they simply refused to make. So sign 2 isn't about intelligence, and it isn't about income. It's about which version of your life you're negotiating with. If every decision gets weighed against right now, you'll keep losing to right now, forever. If a decision gets weighed against a future you can actually picture, the math starts working in your favor. Which brings us to the third sign, and it's the one people notice last, because it doesn't look like progress. It looks like boredom. People who are financially ahead tend to feel strangely calm about money. Not excited, not anxious. Calm, almost to the point of indifference, day to day. That flatness is not what you'd expect from someone doing well. But it makes sense once you understand what's driving most people's money anxiety in the first place. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, along with Amos Tversky, developed what's called prospect theory in the late 1970s, and one of its central findings was this: losses feel roughly twice as painful as equivalent gains feel good. That single asymmetry explains an enormous amount of financial behavior. It's why people check their stock portfolio obsessively during a downturn, but barely glance at it during a calm market. It's why a 5% drop feels catastrophic, even when the long-term trend is upward. Loss aversion doesn't just make people uncomfortable. It makes them act, often badly, at exactly the wrong moments. Selling low out of fear and buying high out of excitement. People who are ahead haven't escaped this bias. Nobody escapes it entirely. What they've done is build a system that never puts them in a position to feel it acutely. Diversified instead of concentrated. Automated instead of actively traded. Positioned for a decade instead of a quarter. When the emotional spike of loss aversion has nothing sharp to grab onto, it simply has less to work with. The result isn't excitement about money. It's quiet. And quiet, in this specific context, is what winning actually feels like. Let's put all three signs into a single scene. Because abstractions like these only mean something once you can picture them. Imagine two people, same job, same salary, 5 years apart in age. The first checks her balance every few days, feels a small spike of anxiety each time, moves money around reactively when the market dips, and treats saving as whatever's left after spending happens. The second has a fixed percentage of every paycheck routed automatically into retirement accounts and index funds before she ever sees it. She checks her portfolio maybe once a quarter. When the market drops 8%, she doesn't feel much of anything because she wasn't checking daily. And her plan already assumed drops like this would happen. 5 years from now, the first person's outcome depends entirely on how disciplined she manages to be, week after week, for 260 weeks in a row. The second person's outcome barely depends on her at all, because she built a structure that doesn't require ongoing willpower to keep working. That's not a hypothetical gap. Multiple studies on automatic enrollment in retirement plans have found that default, no decision-required savings consistently and dramatically outperforms voluntary, opt-in savings, precisely because human discipline is a far less reliable resource than human systems. Here's the twist most people don't expect. None of these three signs require more money than you currently have. You don't need a raise to automate your saving before you see it. You don't need a bonus to start thinking in decades instead of paydays. You don't need a bull market to build a system boring enough that you stop checking it out of fear. That's the part that should actually bother you a little. The gap between being financially ahead and financially behind isn't primarily a gap in resources. It's a gap in structure, in time horizon, and in what your nervous system has learned to react to. And notice what these three signs have in common. None of them are events. None of them are one-time decisions you make and then move on from. They're defaults, quietly, running in the background of an ordinary week, doing the work that used to require constant attention. That's the actual definition of being ahead. Not a bigger number today, but a system that keeps compounding whether you're paying attention to it or not. So bring it back to right now, to your own bank account, to the app you might open later today. The question isn't whether the number is big enough yet. The question is whether that number already has a job, whether you're negotiating with a future version of yourself who feels real, and whether checking it makes your chest tighten or barely registers at all. You open your banking app. This time, you already know roughly what it says, because it isn't controlling you anymore. That's not a coincidence. That's what being ahead actually looks like.